I have filed 417 incident reports in my career. Atmospheric breaches. Equipment failures. 2 separate occasions involving a crewmate and a decompression event that we do not discuss at reunions. I have documented the mundane and the catastrophic in equal measure, cross-referencing every variable, citing every regulation, signing my name to truths that made my superiors uncomfortable. I have never once, not once, filed a report that began with the word chocolate. Until now. The Oversight Committee will review this record and conclude one of 3 things: that I am lying, that I have suffered a stress-induced cognitive episode, or, and this is the one that keeps me awake during the long cycle, that I am telling the absolute, unvarnished truth. The third option is the one that should frighten them. It frightened me. I am Veth Sarala, Secondary Intelligence Attaché to the 14th Observation Corps, and I watched a human girl, young, underfed, filthy, holding a small brown rectangle of compressed sugar fat, do something to an enemy commander that no fleet engagement had managed in 6 years of this war. She didn't fire a weapon. She didn't transmit a code. She sat down. She broke the chocolate in half. And she offered him a piece. What happened next is the reason I have been awake for 63 consecutive hours trying to find language adequate to describe it. What happened next is the reason 3 commanding officers have requested this report be sealed, classified, and buried in a registry so deep it would take a geological event to surface it. I am going to tell you anyway. Because I think you need to understand what we are dealing with. Not the soldiers. Not the weapons. Not the biology that lets them survive things that should not be survivable. The other thing. The thing underneath all of it. The thing that looks, from the outside, like weakness. The coffee was wrong again. I want to begin there, because it matters not to the story, perhaps, but to me, and this is my account, and I will include what I choose. The dispenser in Observation Post Kether 9 had been calibrated for Veth physiology for approximately 4 standard cycles before someone on the maintenance rotation decided to recalibrate it for a dressy biochemical profile without updating the manifest. The result was a liquid that smelled of roasted grain and tasted of ionized copper and regret. I drank it anyway. I drink it every morning. This is what my career has become. I was on my 3rd cup, if we're being generous with the word cup, and I always am, generosity being the only thing I have left, when the motion alert pinged across my secondary display. Sector 7 Gamma. The collapsed transit hub on the edge of what used to be Marin's Landing before the Carousel reduced it to aesthetically uninteresting rubble. I pulled up the feed. It took me several seconds to understand what I was looking at. The figure was small. Human, obviously, the gait is unmistakable once you've logged enough hours watching them, that particular rolling forward momentum like they're always about to fall and have simply decided not to. She was young. The scanners pegged her somewhere in the 2nd decade of a human lifespan, which I have since learned is considered, by humans themselves, to be practically a child. She did not move like a child. She moved like something that had recently been tested by the universe and passed by a margin too narrow to brag about. She was carrying a pack that looked roughly as heavy as she was. Her uniform, and I use the term loosely, given that it had been patched in at least 11 places with materials that were clearly not regulation, identified her as belonging to the 7th Human Forward Division. The 7th. I'd read the reports. The 7th had been holding the Marin's Landing sector for 19 months with resupply intervals that the Logistics Committee kept filing as delayed in a way that I suspected meant abandoned. She ducked under a collapsed beam. She stopped. She looked at the ruins of the transit hub in a way that I can only describe as professional disappointment, not devastated, not afraid, just quietly and thoroughly unhappy with the situation, the way a person is unhappy when they open a drawer and find it empty for the 4th time that week. Then, she pulled out a small, battered notebook and wrote something in it. I leaned forward. I have a bad habit of leaning forward. My supervisor has mentioned it in 2 separate performance evaluations. Veth Sarala demonstrates excessive emotional investment in field observations. I did not tell him that excessive emotional investment was the only thing keeping me sane during 8-hour shifts watching sensor data and drinking copper-tasting coffee in a box orbiting a contested world. I smiled and nodded and leaned forward again the moment his attention was elsewhere. I leaned forward now. The notebook was old. The kind of old that means it has been carried through things it was not designed to survive. The cover was dark with what might have been water damage and might have been something worse. She wrote quickly, pressing hard. Tore the page out. Folded it. Tucked it into her breast pocket. Then, she sat down on a chunk of broken permacrete that was approximately the right height for sitting, swung the massive pack off her shoulders, and started going through it. The feed was thermal and partial spectrum, good enough for the Oversight Committee's purposes, which meant good enough to count bodies and track heat signatures but not particularly useful for the kind of granular observation I was conducting. I switched to the optical relay on the secondary tower, which gave me a cleaner image. She was organizing. I don't know why this surprised me. I have logged enough hours observing humans in field conditions to know that organizing is what they do when the alternatives are panicking or dying, and they are constitutionally resistant to both. But there was something almost meditative about it. Each item came out of the pack and was examined, and then either went into a pile on her left or a pile on her right or back into the pack. She was sorting by criteria I couldn't immediately identify. Left pile, rations, 2 compact medical kits, a folded metallic sheet I recognized as emergency thermal wrap. Right pile, 3 items I couldn't identify at this resolution, something cylindrical, something flat and rectangular, and something small wrapped in foil. Back in the pack, weapons components, which she handled with the absent ease of someone who has handled them so many times they have stopped being remarkable. A field communicator that looked like it had been repaired with components from at least 2 other field communicators. A canteen. She looked at the canteen for a moment. Shook it. Set it on the right pile with an expression that I would later come to recognize as this is a problem for future me, and future me is going to be very annoyed. I made a note in my log. 1,407 hours, human subject, juvenile adult classification, conducting inventory audit in Sector 7 Gamma. Behavioral markers, organized, calm, operational. No visible distress. Then, I crossed out no visible distress and wrote distress not operationally apparent, because the distinction seemed important and I am a professional. Then, she did something unexpected. She reached into the right pile and picked up the small foil-wrapped item. Turned it over in her hands. The foil caught the light, late-cycle sun, the reddish-gold kind that makes even rubble look somewhat artistic, and, for a moment the image on my feed was almost pretty. She peeled the foil back. The item inside was brown. Dark, almost black at the edges. Roughly rectangular. My olfactory sensors were not active on this relay. I would later curse this omission, but the database kicked in a half-second later with a probability match. Theobroma cacao derivative. Confectionery. Common human cultural artifact. Trade name varies by region. Colloquially, chocolate. She looked at it for a long moment. Not the way you look at food when you're hungry, though she was clearly hungry. The scanner had flagged her metabolic output as elevated, the kind of elevated that means a body working hard on insufficient fuel. She looked at it the way you look at something you've been saving. Something you've been keeping for a particular moment and are now trying to decide whether this is that moment or whether there will be a better one later and whether later is a concept you can currently afford. She decided something. She broke it in half. Put one half back in the foil. Wrapped it carefully. Put it back in the right pile. Put the other half in her mouth. Closed her eyes. I watched her eat half a piece of chocolate in the ruins of Marin's Landing at 1,408 hours, and I felt, and I am recording this because I committed to recording accurate observations and I will not flinch from accurate observations. I felt something that my training had not prepared me for. Not pity. Not academic curiosity. Something more uncomfortable than either of those things. I turned back to my coffee. Drank it. It still tasted like ionized copper and regret. The Carrot Salt Patrol came through at 1,441 hours. I want to be precise about the timeline because the Oversight Committee will want to map it, and because precision is what I have instead of control. 1,441 hours. 33 minutes after the girl sat down in the rubble and ate half her chocolate. I had been watching her work in the interim. She'd been cannibalizing parts from the right pile cylindrical item to do something to the communicator, and I had zoomed in as far as the optical relay allowed without going to full enhancement, which requires authorization I don't have at my clearance level, a bureaucratic limitation that I have submitted 3 formal complaints about and which I will continue to complain about until someone listens or I die, whichever comes first. The patrol was a standard Sol survey unit. For soldiers, light scout configuration, not expecting engagement. Their body language, and, yes, I can read Sol body language. I spent 14 months studying it during my posting to the Diplomatic Observation Division before that entire division was dissolved in a budget restructure that I am still bitter about, was casual. Routine. They had not seen her. The girl had seen them. I know this because she stopped moving. Not froze, that's different, that's a prey response, and, whatever the girl was, she was not prey, a distinction I will return to. She just stopped, in the middle of resoldering something with a tool I didn't recognize, and became very still in a way that looked almost lazy until you noticed that every muscle in her visible profile had shifted toward a different kind of readiness. She put the tool down. Slowly. Without looking at it. Her eyes tracked the patrol the way a sensor array tracks a moving target, steady, continuous, adjusting. The patrol came around the east edge of the collapsed transit platform. They were moving along the natural path through the rubble, the cleared channel that the rubble itself created, the way water finds a river. Efficient. Predictable. She was on the west side of the platform, in the hollow created by 2 collapsed support columns and the angle of a fallen roof section. The patrol's path would take them within 40 meters of her position but would not bring them around the platform's west face unless something redirected them. She looked at the platform. I watched her look at the platform. And I had, in that moment, a very specific and uncomfortable sensation that I have only experienced twice before in my career, once watching a chess game between 2 theoretical strategists during the Veth Academy's annual tournament, and once watching a senior cryptographer work through a code that everyone else had declared unbreakable. The sensation of watching something think. Not react. Not execute. Think. She reached into the right pile again. Picked up the flat rectangular item. It was a reflective panel. Emergency signaling equipment, the kind issued to human forward units for extraction coordination. Small, maybe 15 centimeters on its longest edge. She angled it precisely. Propped it against the rubble on her east side. The late-cycle sun, still that reddish-gold quality, hit the panel and scattered light in a very specific direction, northwest, across the rubble field, in a pattern that looked exactly like the kind of reflection you'd get from disturbed debris or wildlife moving through the sector. The patrol hesitated. The leader, identifiable by crest coloration, third-cycle carousel officer, I pegged her as a sector lieutenant, made a hand signal. 2 of the 4 soldiers broke right, circling toward the northwest to investigate the reflection. The remaining 2 continued along the original path. The girl had reduced the immediate threat by 50% in 4 seconds with a piece of emergency signaling equipment and a geometric understanding of where the sun was. I wrote in my log, 1,441 hours, subject demonstrates tactical spatial reasoning under pressure. Minimal resource deployment. No weapons engagement. I underlined the last part. Then, I added, note for self, cross-reference with forward unit casualty data on improvised deflection techniques. This may not be the first time. The 2 remaining soldiers passed within 38 meters of her position. She did not breathe. I know because I ran the thermal data back later and mapped her respiratory pattern. She held her breath for 41 seconds. Humans, for reference, begin to experience significant physiological distress at the 60-second threshold under normal conditions. She was not under normal conditions. She was crouching in rubble with 43 kilos of pack equipment, having recently completed moderate physical exertion and presenting an elevated metabolic output, holding her breath for 41 seconds while 2 armed soldiers passed 40 meters away. Then, they were past her. She exhaled. Picked up the reflective panel. Folded it. Put it back in the right pile. Picked up her tool. Went back to work on the communicator. I sat back in my chair. My coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. It tasted like ionized copper and regret and something new that I didn't have a word for yet. I was beginning to suspect I would need one. At 1,523 hours she got the communicator working. I know this because she held it up, pressed something, listened, pressed something else, made a face that I have since learned to identify as the news is exactly as bad as I expected and I am furious about being right, and then said something into it that my audio pickup, being a secondary relay not rated for voice capture, was unable to record. I filed a formal complaint about this with the equipment division at 1,524 hours. At 1,531 hours she stood up, repacked the pack with the systematic efficiency she'd shown before, swung it onto her shoulders, and looked at the ruins for a moment. She picked up the right pile. All of it. The cylindrical item she'd cannibalized for parts, she pocketed the remaining pieces. The reflective panel. The two items I still hadn't identified. The empty canteen. The foil-wrapped half of the chocolate. She put the chocolate in her breast pocket. She looked at the ruins of Marin's Landing for one more moment, in that particular way she had, not sentimental, not cold, just present with it, just honest about what it was. Then, she walked north. Toward the Careth-Sul forward line. I sat up straight. I spilled the cold copper coffee across my secondary display. I did not file a complaint about this with the equipment division. I did not file anything. I watched the feed with both hands flat on the console and, my heart doing something architecturally inadvisable inside my chest, and, I thought, she is walking toward the forward line. Not away from it. Toward it. And, the notebook page she had folded and put in her breast pocket, next to the chocolate, I had watched her write it, watched her fold it, watched her keep it through the patrol and, the 41-second breath hold and, the inventory and, the repair work. I didn't know what it said. I would find out. But, first she had to survive long enough for it to matter. And, watching her walk into the dark between the ruined buildings, pack swaying, gait that rolling forward momentum, I thought about the chocolate. Half eaten, half saved. Saved for what? Saved for whom? I thought about the specific decision that represented. In the middle of everything. Half now. Half for later. Or half for someone else. I didn't know yet. I pressed full enhancement authorization anyway, the kind that requires clearance I don't have, the kind that will flag on my file, the kind that my supervisor will send me a very pointed memo about in the morning. I pressed it. I watched her go. I should explain what the Careth-Sul forward line was. Not what it is now. What it was, at 1,531 hours on the day the girl walked north, when I was watching with unauthorized enhancement clearance and a spreading coffee stain on my secondary display and the specific flavor of dread that comes from watching someone do something you cannot stop and cannot look away from. The forward line was not, technically, a line. Lines imply order. The Careth-Sul forward position at Marin's Landing was a perimeter, 3 concentric rings of hardened positions around what had been the transit hub's administrative complex, now repurposed as a field operations center. The outer ring was automated sensor clusters and deterrent projectors, the kind that trigger on heat and mass and do not ask clarifying questions. The middle ring was mobile patrols, rotating interval, 6-unit cycles. The inner ring was occupied. Commander Vetheril had established his command post inside the administrative complex 18 months ago, shortly after the 7th Human Forward Division had been pushed back from Marin's Landing in the engagement that I was not supposed to have full intelligence files on but absolutely had full intelligence files on, because I had submitted 14 separate information requests over the course of a year and the administrative backlog had eventually resolved in my favor through pure bureaucratic attrition. Vetheril. Let me tell you about Vetheril. Except I can't, really, in the way that matters, because the Oversight Committee has classified his psychological profile at a clearance level above my current authorization. What I can tell you, from the observable data of 6 years of field reports, is that he was precise, methodical, and had presided over the Marin's Landing occupation without making a single tactical error significant enough to be flagged for review. He was also, according to the 3 Careth-Sul contact assessments I had managed to obtain through the same attrition strategy, currently under significant command pressure from his own superiors about the cost-to-benefit ratio of holding Marin's landing against the 7TH's persistent disruption campaigns. Disruption campaigns. That was what the committee called them. What Vetheril called them in his reported field communications, I had learned from intercepted fragments, was something that translates roughly as the unscheduled inconveniences. The 7th had been conducting unscheduled inconveniences from the rubble of Marin's landing for 19 months on insufficient resupply. I was beginning to have some thoughts about the word insufficient. She cleared the outer ring at 1,547 hours. I have reviewed this footage 46 times since the event and I still cannot explain with full confidence how she did it. The sensor clusters used trispectrum detection, thermal, mass displacement, and a narrow electromagnetic sweep designed to catch active signals. She had shut down her communicator. The pack was fully sealed. Her thermal output was, and here I need to be precise, because this was flagged in my report and was the subject of considerable discussion, lower than baseline. Not dramatically lower. Not impossibly lower. Just enough lower that the outer ring automated system registered her as ambient rather than target. I ran this against the metabolic data I'd collected earlier. She had been running elevated metabolic output before. Then, she'd stopped. Then, she'd spent 90 minutes doing careful mechanical work, which does not require significant physical output. By the time she reached the outer ring, her body temperature had dropped to a resting state that was, genuinely, barely above the ambient thermal signature of the surrounding rubble. She had not done this on purpose. She couldn't have. The thermal differential required was within normal human variation, not the result of deliberate physiological control. She had simply done 90 minutes of quiet work and then walked, and the consequence was that the automated system did not see her. The universe had cooperated with her. I don't know what to do with that. I wrote it in my log exactly as I've written it here, and then I stared at it for several minutes, and then I filed the log and moved on because I had a subject to track. The middle ring was where it should have gotten difficult. 6-unit mobile patrols, rotating interval. If you know the interval, and she couldn't know the interval, it was randomized within a 4-minute window specifically to prevent pattern exploitation. The gap between patrols at any given point is somewhere between 9 and 13 minutes. Long enough to cross, but only if you cross at the right time in the right place, and only if you can correctly estimate where you are in the rotation. She stopped at the rubble edge of the middle ring's patrol corridor. She did not have a scanner. She did not have any detection equipment that I could identify. She had a functioning communicator, a notebook, a pack full of practical necessities, and 1.5 pieces of chocolate. She waited. I counted. She waited 11 minutes and 47 seconds without moving. I have already mentioned the 41-second breath hold. I mention it again because I think context matters, and the context is 11 minutes and 47 seconds, crouched at a rubble edge, not moving, apparently doing nothing, in a contested sector with automated deterrence systems behind her and armed patrols ahead of her. When the patrol passed, and I watched it pass on my feed, the 6 soldiers in their rotation, close enough that the thermal bloom from their bodies was registering on my enhanced display, she moved through the gap in 34 seconds. 34 seconds. I wrote, 1,559 hours, subject penetrated middle ring. Method, patience. Then, I wrote it again in the comments field because I felt it deserved emphasis. Method, patience. The inner ring was where she stopped being invisible. Not by accident. That's the part one want to be clear about, because I have reviewed this footage 46 times and, I am certain, she stopped being invisible on purpose. At 1,603 hours, she walked out from behind the remnant of a collapsed internal wall, into a corridor that the occupation forces had cleared and lit and used as the primary access route between the administrative complex's east entrance and the command section. She walked into the light. 3 soldiers saw her immediately. The response time was good, under 4 seconds to weapons raised and a containment challenge, which tells you something about Vetheril's training standards. She raised both hands. The pack was still on her back, but she raised both hands and she said something. My audio relay was still secondary, still not rated for voice capture, and I was composing a very emphatic formal complaint in my head while watching, and the soldiers did not fire. I exhaled. I had apparently been holding my breath. The soldiers held their positions, weapons up, while 2 of the 3 conducted a rapid assessment, scanning for active signals, checking the pack visually, standard contact protocol. She stood with her hands raised and her expression on the optical feed, doing something complicated that I spent some time trying to read. Not afraid. Not performing calm, the way you perform calm when you're afraid and, you know it's visible. Actually something else. Something in the register of resigned but determined, like a person who has made a decision they know is going to cost them something and has decided it's worth it anyway. One of the soldiers took the pack off her. She let him. The other 2 walked her, hands still raised, toward the east entrance. Into the command section. To Vetheril. I don't have footage of what happened inside the command section. I need you to understand how much this bothers me. I have spent 11 years in observation roles and I have never been as angry at a surveillance gap as I was at 1603 hours when the feed shifted from the lit corridor to the standard internal operations camera, which Vetheril had disabled 4 months ago citing security concerns, and I had filed a protest about this at the time and was now experiencing the specific vindictive frustration of a person who was right and cannot benefit from it. What I have is the after. 1641 hours, Vetheril's command section shows new thermal activity consistent with a second occupant. Duration of meeting, 38 minutes. During this time, the patrol rotation continued normally. No alarm escalation. No emergency signal. Standard operational tempo. 38 minutes. For reference, the standard carousel field interrogation protocol for a captured enemy operative is 7 minutes for intake assessment and, then, a transfer to detention processing. If the operative is flagged as intelligence significant, an additional 23 minutes for preliminary questioning. That's 30 minutes, maximum, under the most intensive standard process. She was in there for 38 minutes. And, at 1641 hours, the thermal signature that had to be Vetheril showed movement to the west side of the room, which was where his personal equipment station was logged in my building schematic files, and then, a period of stillness. And then, a second period of stillness. The kind of stillness that is different from the first kind. I don't know how to quantify that. I know what I read in it. I may be wrong. I am recording it anyway because I committed to accurate observations. At 1649 hours, she was escorted back to the east entrance by a single soldier, not 2, not 3, 1, and returned her pack, and walked out into the outer corridor, and then, out of the building. She still had both hands. She still had the pack. She still had, as far as I could determine from the thermal red of her breast pocket, the notebook and its remaining contents. But, the foil-wrapped half-piece of chocolate, I cross-referenced the thermal signature. It was gone. I need to tell you what was in the notebook. I didn't know yet at 1649 hours. I found out later, 36 hours later, through channels I am not going to describe in this report because some of those channels involve favors I am not prepared to acknowledge officially, and, when I read the translation, I sat with it for a while. The page she had torn out and tucked into her breast pocket, written in the ruins of Marin's Landing at 1407 hours while she was sorting through her supplies. Commander, you have held this position for 18 months. We have contested it for 19. You know what the resupply intervals look like from your side. I know what they look like from mine. This is not sustainable for either of us and we both know it. I am not authorized to negotiate anything. I have no authority, no rank worth noting, and nothing to offer except one observation: the people on both sides of this are tired. I am going to leave you something. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to do anything at all. Neither do I. That's the point. Specialist Sarah Okafor, 7th HFD. Below the text, a small drawing. A rough sketch, the kind you make in the field when you have no time and no materials. 2 lines, roughly parallel, with a gap between them. And, in the gap, small, careful, taking up less space than everything around it, a rectangle. Divided in half. I looked at this drawing for a long time. I thought about Vetheral's stillness on the thermal feed. The first kind and the second kind. I thought about a piece of chocolate, broken in half, one half eaten in the ruins and one half carried through 2 defensive perimeters and 38 minutes of whatever that conversation was. I thought about the 7th Human Forward Division. 19 months. Unscheduled inconveniences. Insufficient resupply. The notebook page was not a negotiation. It was not a tactical document. It was not intelligence. It was a person, in the middle of a war, extending a hand across a line she had no authority to cross, offering something she had no obligation to share, and trusting, and this is the word I kept coming back to, the word I wrote in my log and then wrote again, trusting that the thing on the other side of the line was still enough like her to understand what the gesture meant. I wrote in my log, 1,649 hours, subject exited carousel forward position. All original inventory accounted for -1 item. I sat back. My coffee was cold. I didn't drink it. I was thinking about the second kind of stillness. The memo from my supervisor arrived at 0634 hours the following morning. Vetserala, unauthorized use of enhanced surveillance clearance, Sector 7 Gamma, cycle date 1523. Report to review board, 1,100 hours. Bring documentation. I read it twice. Drank my copper coffee. Wrote back, acknowledged. I have documentation. I had documentation. I had approximately 14 hours of documentation, cross-referenced across 3 relay feeds, with annotated timestamps and 2 formal complaints about relay equipment limitations and 1 informal complaint that I had written in the margins of my log at 1,649 hours and then thought better of and scratched out, though not completely, because if I'm honest I wanted a record of it somewhere even if no one but me would ever read it. The scratched out note said, "We are going to lose this war if we keep only watching." I scratched it out harder. It was still legible. What happened in the 36 hours between the girl walking out of the carousel forward position and my appearance before the review board is, technically, a separate matter from the incident I was called to account for. Technically. What I can tell you is that the operational tempo in Sector 7 Gamma changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would show up in a daily summary as a significant shift. But I was the one watching Sector 7 Gamma, and I had been watching it for long enough that I knew its rhythms the way you know a piece of music you've heard until it's somewhere in your bones, the patrol intervals, the supply movements, the maintenance cycles on the deterrent projectors. At 0347 hours, 12 hours after the girl left the forward position, one of the deterrent projectors in the outer ring went offline for 4 minutes and 11 seconds before cycling back on. Maintenance window, possible, though unusual at that hour. At 0812 hours, the middle ring patrol rotation extended its interval by 6 minutes at the northwest approach corridor. At 1104 hours, Vetheral's command section went dark, no thermal activity, for 2 hours and 17 minutes. I noted each of these events in my log. I noted them separately. I did not draw a line between them. I want to be very clear that I did not draw a line between them because I was not authorized to draw conclusions at my clearance level, and because drawing a line between them would have required me to write something in an official document that I was not ready to write yet. What it would have required me to write was this: the commander of the carousel forward position at Marin's Landing appears to be opening a series of small, deniable gaps in his own defensive perimeter. I was not ready to write that. I wrote instead, 0347, outer ring projector maintenance anomaly noted. 0812, patrol interval irregularity, northwest corridor. 1104, command section thermal gap, duration 137 minutes. And then, I filed my log in the standard format and spent 40 minutes staring at my secondary display with my coffee going cold in my hand. The coffee tasted like ionized copper and regret and the specific flavor of something very large moving just below the surface of what I was allowed to see. I found out about the notebook at 1823 hours, 36 hours after the event, through the channels I mentioned and will not describe. I read the translation 3 times. This is not sustainable for either of us and we both know it. The 7th Human Forward Division had been conducting unscheduled inconveniences in Marin's Landing for 19 months on a resupply schedule that my logistics contacts, I have logistics contacts, developed over 11 years of filing information requests and, occasionally being in the right place when someone needed to complain, described as deliberately inadequate. Not accidentally inadequate. Deliberately. I had suspected this. I had not had confirmation. Now I had confirmation, from a source I could not cite, about a document I had obtained through channels I could not describe, in the context of an incident I had observed using clearance I was not authorized to use. I was building a very beautiful case that I was going to have enormous difficulty presenting to anyone. I thought about Specialist Sarah Okafor, 7th HFD, sitting in the rubble of Marin's Landing with a notebook and a pack and half a piece of chocolate, doing math that nobody above her pay grade was doing. Calculating not whether she could win this particular moment but whether she could change what the next moment looked like. Using the only currency she had, which was time and attention and one small gesture that her own command structure would have court-martialed her for if they'd known about it. I am not authorized to negotiate anything. She knew that. She did it anyway. Not because she thought she was going to end the war. Not because she had some strategy that I hadn't thought of. Because she was 19 months into insufficient resupply and she understood something that I had been watching from my observation post for 11 years without ever quite articulating, that the opposite of war isn't peace. The opposite of war is this. Two people on different sides of a line, both tired, one of them deciding to treat the other one like a person and seeing if it bounces back. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you do it and nothing changes and you walk back through the rubble and you're just a soldier who gave away half her chocolate to no effect. But sometimes the outer ring projector goes offline for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The patrol interval extends by 6 minutes in the Northwest Corridor. The command section goes dark for 2 hours and 17 minutes. And a notebook page that was not a negotiation and not a tactical document and not intelligence becomes something that I don't have a word for in either Veth or Karathsul or any of the 6 other languages I have operational proficiency in. Maybe there isn't a word for it. Maybe that's the point. The review board was chaired by Sub-Commander Vethorin, who had the particular energy of someone who had decided the outcome of the meeting before the meeting started and was sitting through the formalities as a professional courtesy. I placed my documentation on the table. 14 hours of feed data. Annotated timestamps. The formal complaints about relay equipment limitations. Sub-Commander Vethorin looked at it the way you look at an amount of paperwork that is significantly larger than you were expecting. The unauthorized clearance use, he said. I observed an anomalous contact event in Sector 7 Gamma, I said. The secondary relay was insufficient for accurate assessment. I escalated to enhanced clearance to maintain observation integrity. You don't have enhanced clearance. No. Then, you escalated beyond your authorization. Yes. A pause. And the assessment? I looked at him. I thought about what I was going to say and what I was going to leave out and what I was going to put in the report and what I was going to scratch out in the margins where only I could almost read it. A juvenile adult human operative penetrated the Karathsul forward position in Sector 7 Gamma, I said. She was in contact with Commander Vetheril for 38 minutes before extraction. In the 36 hours following this contact, 3 separate anomalies were observed in the Karathsul defensive posture at Sector 7 Gamma, consistent with I paused. Consistent with irregular maintenance activity. Vethorin looked at me. Irregular maintenance activity, he repeated. That would be the conservative characterization, yes. Another pause. Longer. What is the less conservative characterization? I thought about the chocolate. Half now, half for later, or half for someone who might need it more. I thought about the second kind of stillness on the thermal feed. I thought about a person in 19 months of insufficient resupply who had done the math and decided that a small gesture was worth the cost, which she had no way of knowing, and had paid it anyway. I think someone in that rubble decided to be human at someone, I said. And I think it worked. Vethorin was quiet for a long moment. That is not an intelligence assessment. No, I said. It's an observation. He looked at my documentation. All 14 hours of it. The unauthorized clearance use will be noted on your record. I expected that. The operational data will be classified at a level above your current clearance. I said nothing. The anomalies in Sector 7 Gamma will be monitored by a dedicated team. I would like to be on that team. He looked at me. You are aware, he said, that if this assessment is accurate, if what you observed has the implications you appear to believe it has, it would require a significant revision of our entire operational framework for the Marin's landing sector. Yes. It would raise questions about the resupply policy for the 7th Human Forward Division. It would. It would suggest that a single human specialist, operating without authorization, with minimal resources, half a piece of chocolate, I said. He stopped. Half a piece of chocolate, I said again. And a notebook. And a decision. The room was quiet. Vethorin looked at my documentation for a long time. You'll receive the unauthorized clearance notation, he said. I know. And, I would strongly suggest, he said, that in future, if you observe an anomalous contact event that requires enhanced clearance assessment, he stopped. Yes? I said. He looked at me. Then, at the documentation. Then, at the wall behind me, which was featureless and institutional and gave him nothing. File the clearance request before you use it, he said. The turnaround is usually 3 to 5 days. Yes, sir. The observation data will be processed. You'll receive a summary when it's been cleared. I'll be waiting. I gathered my documentation. At the door, I stopped. Subcommander, I said. He looked up. The 7th Human Forward Division. Their resupply intervals. I paused. Chose my words with the precision I'd spent 11 years developing. If someone were to review the logistics assessment, not at my clearance level, obviously, but at a level that could authorize a review, that's not your concern. No, I said. It's not. I left. I filed my incident report that evening. 417 incident reports in my career. This was the one that started with chocolate. I wrote it carefully. I included the timestamps, the relay data, the annotated observations. I included the anomalies. I included my assessment of the anomalies, conservatively characterized. I did not include the translation of the notebook page. I did not have authorization to possess it. I did not include the scratched-out margin note. I included, in the final section, additional observations, analyst discretion, one sentence that I had been composing since 1649 hours the previous day when I watched the girl walk back into the rubble with an empty breast pocket and her pack and her rolling forward gait, back toward whatever waited for the 7th in 19 months of contested ground. This analyst assesses that the observable behavior of the human operative designated specialist Sarah Okafor, 7th HFD, represents a category of strategic action for which current threat assessment frameworks are insufficient. I considered that sentence for a while. Then, I added, recommend framework revision. Recommend resupply review. Recommend continued observation. Then, I signed my name. I want to tell you what happened next. I want to tell you whether the gaps in the perimeter stayed open, whether the 7th got their resupply, whether Specialist Okafor made it out of those 19 months and the months after. I don't have that clearance. What I have is this: 3 days after my incident report was processed and classified, a logistical review was initiated for Forward Division resupply protocols across 4 contested sectors. I found out through the same channels I won't describe. And, I have this: 6 days after the incident, the outer ring projector in Sector 7 Gamma's northwest approach went offline for a scheduled maintenance window of 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Scheduled. I am not drawing a line between these things. I am not authorized to draw a line between these things. I am noting them, here, in a report that is going to be classified at a level I cannot access. And, I am trusting, and, there is that word again, the word I kept coming back to, I am trusting that someone who can access it will read it and understand what I was trying to say. Not about the war. Not about the tactical situation. Not about framework revisions or resupply protocols or unauthorized clearance use. About a girl in the rubble with half a piece of chocolate and a notebook page she had no authorization to write, making a bet on something that could not be measured or classified or filed in the standard format. The bet was this: that tired is tired, across whatever line you draw between people. That a gesture, small enough to deny and specific enough to mean something, travels further than weapons or orders or strategic frameworks. That the thing on the other side of the line is still enough like you to understand what it means when you break something in half and offer it. I don't know if she knew it would work. I don't think she needed to know. She did it anyway. I have been thinking about that for 63 consecutive hours. I am going to keep thinking about it. And I am going to keep watching Sector 7 Gamma. And I am going to keep filing my reports. And every morning I am going to drink my copper-tasting coffee and lean forward in my chair and watch, because I am a professional and this is what I do. And I am going to remember that somewhere out there in 19 months of rubble and unscheduled inconveniences and insufficient resupply, a person decided that the half she had left was worth more as a gift than as a reserve. And something answered. Incident Report 418, filed. Classification pending. Analyst, Vetsarala, Secondary Intelligence Attaché, 14th Observation Corps. Status, unauthorized clearance notation received. Framework review recommended. Continued observation authorized. Additional note, personal log, not for official record, I put in a maintenance request for the coffee dispenser today. I've been told the turnaround is 3 to 5 days. I'll be waiting.